taking some of these themes that you've mentioned about, designing to a certain budget and trying to figure out where to put your resources, whether it's truly financial or your development time. How did that process apply to some of the newer products coming out of ELAC? So we're thinking specifically around Carina, Vela, Navis. There's some really interesting products. We've been able to demo some of them at TMR, and I think one of the reasons we were really excited about this chat is we've all felt that they punch well above their weight. So you've done a great job against your budget constraints. You brought products that offer amazing value, but what was the process like with those three product lines specifically?
Well, they only punch above their weight because I didn't make them too heavy.
But
Travis he dreads me being with him for making it. Okay, so when we set up ELAC, or ELAC Americas, of course, ELAC's been around since 1926. A long-established company, starting off with underwater acoustics. ELAC stands for electroacoustic. In the late 40s, switched to doing turntables and became the, I think, third largest turntable manufacturer in the world.
Right.
They invented the moving magnet cartridge and licensed it to Shaw and manufactured for Shaw. So they've been in this a long time.
Yeah.
Around the mid-80s, they started doing speakers. And they've been successful in the rest of the world, but never broke really into the US market. And I knew of them from all my travels over around Europe when I was with TAD and seeing them at the Munich show. But I knew they'd not really a force over here. So the idea was set up a separate division, the kind of sort of semi-autonomous, with me and some of my other guys who came with me from Pioneer, to do affordable speakers at price points that ELAC hadn't traditionally done. But because I was known for doing high-end and affordable with that Pioneer speaker, I could get away with it, in my view, without damaging the image of ELAC. Mm-hmm. But it would be a quicker way to establish ELAC's identity in the US market. So that's why we started with the Debut and the Unify. But ultimately, the goal was always to grow the company, start working closer together with the two groups, develop sales channels that would allow us to sell some of the higher end stuff that ELAC had already developed, and just start kind of bringing the two groups together. So, but at the same time, me moving upwards in price points as well, especially once we got everything established and it came time to redevelop some of Germany's models that had been around for quite a while and were iconic models for Germany. Mm-hmm. Let's work together and either develop in a way we can bring and market them here, or in the case of Carina, I would redevelop one of their own models, the 240 series, splitting the workload. And so Carina was the first one that was an established product range from Germany that I had the responsibility for redeveloping. And it was interesting and a bit scary, I suppose, because engineers have their ways of doing things. There's a chief engineer over in Germany.
Yep.
And, we get on very well, personally, but we've still got, you'll always have your own ideas. The good thing about joining ELAC was we all have very common ideas, and then we'll have some individual ideas. But they already had a concentric driver based on a folded ribbon tweeter, a jet tweeter. So I knew they believed in concentric drivers. So, there's a further common factor there. So, but what was interesting about Carina, I had never worked with folded ribbons before. Now, folded ribbons came about in the early 70s. Oscar Heil developed it originally, called the AMT, or Air Motion Transformer. But only he was really doing anything with it in the US. And ELAC came across the technology and they ran with it, called it the jet tweeter, jet emission tweeter. and it's their signature look and technology, along with their diamond looking cone for the woofer now.
Yeah.
But it's always been what they've used. Since I never used it, and I was going to be redeveloping one of their products, now I need to start understanding folded ribbons and choosing what I want to do with it. So that was fascinating, because that was, you could say that was a research project for me.
Yeah.
Trying to understand the technology of it, or what the technology gave you in terms of measured performance and listening performance, how to integrate it into an overall product that would be me. Yeah, I'm never going to really doctor something specifically thinking, oh, I'll doctor it for this market or that. It's just,
Right.
I've got a proven formula. If I hadn't, I wouldn't be in business. If I have, kind of why change it? In fact, I was just reading or watching a review just recently. Someone was doing the debut reference speaker and said, yeah, you definitely know. He said, if I'd never seen what the speaker was before I'd listened to it, I'd have said, that must be one of Andrew Jones' speakers. Now, I'm not sure I really believe that to that extent. Would I even know blind that it was one of mine?
Does Andrew Jones know if it's an Andrew Jones speaker?
I don't want to listen blind and go, oh, I like that speaker and it's not mine. Right. So, nonetheless, how do I take what I've heard of folded ribbons in the past and just do what I think I want it to do without losing? If it never sounded like a folded ribbon by the time I'd finished, what was the point of doing it? That was one of my initial thoughts. But anyway, that's what Carina became, my interpretation of how to design a speaker with a folded ribbon.
And I assume based on that statement, your process was really more evolutionary there than, let's totally reinvent.
Oh, sure.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it was. So for that's one of those instances where you have a target of how you want it to measure, but since it performs differently, you have to reevaluate what is the right measured performance that you're trying to get. So we fell foul of that at KEF when we first did Unify. So UniQ, UniQ. In that, because it behaved so differently off axis compared to a regular speaker, we hadn't really fully evaluated that. And our listening room was quite a dead listening room. So we didn't hear so much of the contribution of the diminished off axis high frequency response. So when it got to the market, it sounded a bit like this. And we quickly had to reevaluate what we were doing. So I knew facing, what do we do with the folded ribbon tweeter? I'll target a measurement for it, but then I want to listen and see, okay, yeah, I guess I do need to change the measured response to give it more, and principally because it's got a very different off-axis characteristic at high frequencies. In some frequency ranges, it holds up much better off-axis than some of the dome tweeters I've been using. Dome tweeters these days go as high as most folded ribbons. They go down lower, so I had to be careful in the development of the base driver so that it could properly integrate with the tweeter. Yep. But it was mostly the off-axis behavior, and in its raw form, they often have a bump between 10 and 20K. So they sound airy and fast.
Yeah.
It's a characteristic of the frequency response. And I left a bit of that in, but I didn't want to leave too much in. So that was a very interesting project. And then wondering, well, will the rest of the world who's used to all the speakers that Germany has traditionally developed, will this fit in the range? Will they like it? And luckily it's been proving very successful. But, it is a bit of a different sound than the Vela, for instance, because that is Germany developed. They both sound really good, but there is a characteristic difference, and that's kind of okay.
Interesting.
I was, not everybody likes the same thing. If they did, mine would be the only speaker that sells.
Right.
So there is a variety out there. And I remember when I was doing TAD, there's a huge store in Tokyo, and they have 7 floors, and every floor is a higher price point till you get to the top floor. And this is controlled by, I think, Kawamata-san. And I was having this conversation with him through a translator and saying, you know, I get the idea that all the brands of speakers that you have here, they all have a similarity in the presentation of the sound. My TAD is definitely different. And he was kind of not enamored with my TAD speaker. He understood it. It wasn't what he was looking for.
Interesting.
And so I got into this discussion, trying to be very respectful, because he's hugely successful. And his basic concept was that, yes, I know what is right. My job is to educate people who come in, to show them what is the right way of listening. And he was very successful with that. But other people would have different ideas. Basically, evaluate who your customer is and target a speaker to them, right?
Kind of makes sense.
If they're adamant that they only like this kind of sound, give them it. Make a sale. They're happy, you're happy. So you can like different things. I can like different things. You know, I wouldn't say an electrostatic speaker sounds the same as one of my moving coil speakers. Do I enjoy listening to electrostatic speakers? Yes. Have I got friends in the industry who design speakers that sound very different from mine? Yes. Do I go in and listen and go, I'm really enjoying this? Yes, I do. Would I mimic that sound myself? No, because I'm used to listening in a certain way. So that was Carina. That was my job, to not do something so wildly different that people would never accept it as an ELAC jet tweeter type speaker, but still stay true to what I want to hear. And it's still slightly different from, you know, it's audibly different from a dome tweeter, but it still gives me pretty much what I want to hear from that.
Well, and I know Nick on our team, and he can give some more context to the question, but he had asked, you know, what, if anything, did you bring from that time at TAD to ELAC? And I think it's interesting, you know, part of that is just an Andrew Jones sound delivered, however, that is in keeping with a brand, whether it's TAD or ELAC and their historic technologies. But Nick, did you have any other specific perspective on that question, or is there anything else you're curious about from Andrew's time there?
Yeah, I think you pretty much covered what I was curious about, kind of what you brought maybe from KEF and TAD over to ELAC that you've been able to kind of I don't know if it's experiences or I guess just a design philosophy that you've sort of implemented over there at ELAC.
Well, certainly, if you think about design philosophy, there's certainly a technology philosophy that I bring, which is whenever I can, I do a concentric driver. Yeah, we got into developing that at KEF with the UniQ. I wasn't in product development when we started that. But remember that project I said about all the speakers in the anechoic chamber? They were all concentric drivers, and I was hand building every single one. So I was the first one to build 30 of those, 30 concentric drivers before we even got anything else into production. It was before we launched the first KEF UniQ speaker.
Wow.
And I'd read I remember reading a research paper by a guy called Daniel Queen that said, you know, the next thing about speakers is looking at directivity control. You know, how does it perform off axis? And that always stuck with me. And concentric drivers do that if you do it right. So I've always followed that with me. In fact, the having launched Debut, when we went to do the next speaker series up from that, Unify, and we always like to give our children names. So it was UniQ at KEF, Uni meaning one, Q is the technical symbol for directivity constant. So it was one directivity constant. And it was also unique. So that was Laurie Fincham came up with that. So for Unify, I thought, unify the two drivers together and one fidelity. So I thought that was clever.
I like it.
But it was, if you're going from let's say an average price of $250 for a bookshelf up to $500, and you go into the stores, and this is where, when you're originating ideas for what products you want to do, you do need to do market research and product planning and understand what people are doing. You look at the next price point upwards, $500, and you go, it's still a two-way. It looks better. I'm told the drivers are better, but as a customer who doesn't know too much, why is it double the price? It's, you need educating as to why it's double the price. We thought, if I can do a concentric driver as a three-way, because I will always, whenever I can, use a concentric driver as a three-way. They work so much better as a mid-range tweeter than they do as trying to do a bass mid-range.
Yep.
Can I do a concentric three-way speaker at $500 when everyone is doing just a two-way? That's what Unify became. And it was distinguishably different to look at and how it sounds. And it was a real obvious step up. So always try and do concentric drivers. And even when we started TAD, that first TAD speaker, I was told I was in charge of any decisions that we might conflict on between the team in Japan and myself. Then the decision would go my way. Well, that's scary.
Yeah, it's a lot of control.
Meaning, they would probably mean, we're not taking responsibility for this. we'll give it to Andrew. But it was interesting because there's always, the idea even of joining a Japanese company when I'd already sort of got a career established, and people's opinion of what Japanese speakers are, which was not very high, compared to my opinion of they're some of the best engineers on the planet, and the research they've done in loudspeaker technologies is amazing. I want access to that. If I can join with what they know with what I know, we could do something really cool, which was TAD. And, we never fought on anything. Whenever we discussed ideas, we saw each other's viewpoint. And although we traditionally think that the Japanese have a different idea of the sound that they want to get from something compared to us, based on traditional music differences, we never had that, because I guess once you get to a certain elevated level, it can meet every one of their needs for hearing in certain kinds of music what they need to hear from that kind of music, as well as satisfying everything that I want to hear. So it worked out very well, but it ultimately ended up, this is kind of the kind of speaker Andrew would want to do.
Nice.
So that I often say to people when they question about the sound from different speaker companies, I'll often say it's not necessarily so much the sound of that speaker company, it's the sound of those engineers at that time. And as that engineer moves from company to company, they'll take their ideas. You'll modify it through the years, but you could say the sound signature becomes that of the engineers, unless it's just a totally marketing dominated company that engineers are just there to do the bidding of the marketing and salespeople. Sorry, Travis.
Yeah. Well, let's take a few minutes, if you would. We don't want to keep you all day, but we had some kind of more fun questions.
I've really got nowhere else to go.
That is true. We could just keep going forever, at least for the next 6 weeks. But we wanted to know like a few fun questions for, the man behind the engineer. What are some of your favorite electronics these days that you pair with some of your ELAC gear that as you're developing it or home listening, whatever that might look like?
Well, it would be very remiss of me if I didn't say the Alchemy electronics. Since Peter Madnick, that is one of my ideas to bring Peter into the fold.
Hey.
I'd known him for years. I partnered with him when doing all the demos after the very first launch of Debut, then I always demonstrated with Peter's reborn Alchemy electronics. So we brought him into the fold. I love what he does with electronics. I also at home behind me have a VTL MB200 stereo power amplifier, tube amplifier. I've had great experience with Pass Labs. So there's quite a variety of different electronics I play around with.
Mm-hmm.
I have Peter's DAC Pre, the DDP2, but I also have a Berkeley Audio Design DAC, which is very good.
Right.
I have a pair of Stax 007 electrostatic headphones on the rack behind me. My favorite headphones.
Nice.
Yeah. And
do you get to spend much time actually listening for fun?
Not so much at home.
Yeah.
Just because I'm actually in a condo, and my wife is always fearful of neighbors being disturbed, especially with big speakers like the TADs.
Sure.
But I can listen at work. I've got a listening room at work. That's the fun thing. The idea of, I'm disappearing for 2 hours to listen to some music. I'm actually working. Honest, I am actually working.
So when you're at home, is it more often headphone based?
More often headphones, which is why I was very happy to get the Stax headphones. Yeah. My favorite headphones in the whole world that I'd love to own one day is the original Sennheiser Orpheus.
Ooh.
I mean, that amplifier, that wedge-shaped tube amplifier they did for it.
Yeah.
It captured my imagination when I was young, and
we'll have to put you on a list as a company that sees a lot of pre-owned.
Yeah.
If we have a set come through, we'll have to reach out and let you know. And I know some of the sales guys had some curiosity about what types of music. I know that's always a loaded question. It doesn't have to be audiophile, new, older. When you sit down and listen, either for testing purposes or enjoyment purposes, I'd be curious what you listen to.
So a lot of jazz, not modern jazz, but more, more in the traditional vein.
Yeah.
Celtic music, certainly for listening enjoyment, Celtic music. It has that ancient feel to it. And I come from a background in England of folk dancing. So English folk music, Celtic folk music. So I love that. And more of a contemporary folksy female vocal type thing. I got a lot of female vocal music. I just like that.